Everybody get a chance to audit the books?
Yes, reviewed the bills and found them sufficient to be paid.
All right, so that brings us to the handbook.
Before we do that, could I just have a little public comment, very short?
Sure.
I have been trying to figure out why nobody in the hamlet, other than John Booby, even comes to our farmer's market. So I'm curious if anybody has any ideas. I mean, you could say it's price, this, that, and they don't even come and look.
I don't know, I've heard,
Not a single person
I
other
heard
than
people
him.
from Stanley and the town hall saying that, they didn't know we were having it, and then now they found they had it, and they loved it. I have people that have never been to the farmer's market show last weekend.
Well, we've had people from all over the area, but people in the little hamlet here can come out of their house, take 4 steps, take a look. If they don't like it, they don't come back. That's fine. But they don't even look. And I don't understand. I'm not a marketing guy, so if anybody has any ideas, is it that farmers markets are too, snobby kind of a thing and they're not interested?
I don't think postal kids would be.
Why don't you put your flyers in the store? Maybe they don't
So,
know or whatever.
with all the signs that we have
I
around,
don't know.
and it's there, they're going by.
Yeah.
If anybody has ideas, let me know, because I'm curious.
Interesting.
My problem is it's Saturday. I've got a lot of things to do Saturday.
I know, I don't come off the hill.
If anybody has ideas, let me know. You know where to reach me.
It's yours or mine?
Yours.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll go.
Eric had sent me a few questions and I asked if we could just do them while we were all together so everybody heard the same thing. So I'll read his and then go through our answers. So his first one was, under highway superintendent, what type of health insurance options are we suggesting? So highway superintendent had always been given the same opportunity to choose individual 2-person or family plans, the same as all highway employees have. And the percentage follows that they pay, if DJ would pay, would follow the collective bargaining agreement, the same as any other highway employee. Town clerk was also always given the option of all these 3. We're only proposing after Sue retires, like way down the road, that we would like to offer the new individual health insurance on an individual basis only, and then the collective bargaining agreement for that percentage to be charged. Have we historically given highway superintendent uniforms and clothing allowance? Yes, they've always been entitled to the uniforms, and that cost is under whoever the provider is. Right now we have Cintas. Clothing allowance they always got, and that goes along with the collective bargaining agreement. Currently it's at $300. Buyouts are at the same collective bargaining rate, so that would be uniform. Full-time, how will the town board determine if someone is full-time salaried? Full-time we established last time at 35 hours per week. Current salaried employees, there was a question, no vacation, no sick or personal time, is that accurate? Currently salaried employees like Sue, they don't receive vacation, sick or personal leave at all. Because they're salaried. If somebody wants to change that so they're entitled, let us know. I don't have a problem either way.
I think we should, just to be competitive. Most places give people paid vacation, at least 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're talking about people who are elected though.
Probably shouldn't make any changes for existing people, but for future people, should think about it.
Well, my question,
Because if we do that, we're never gonna get this finished if we start making changes in policy.
That question wasn't about with elected officials. That was just if the number is 35 hours and 5 years down the road, anyone works 35 hours, wouldn't we give them vacation if they're just an employee of the town?
Yes. If it's, say like, we've talked about like, leaving, secretary to the supervisor
Right.
as a title. Say if all of a sudden we needed 35 hours for that person and stuff, she's not an elected official, so, yeah,
Would get.
then you get vacation sick and personal.
I think, I'm not sure, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think that if you have employees in your town government and you deny them the same benefits that you're giving highway people, you're open to a lawsuit. I know that the reason that Carla Engler is getting the salary she's getting, she got an $8,000 bump, is because there was some clause in the state law that she was entitled to the same rate that the highway department guys were at. She was much, much lower, so they ended up having to bump her up because they were afraid of a lawsuit. I'm not sure the details of it because I never got into it, but that's what happened there. And she wasn't the only one. They had to do it with the assistant building inspector too.
I don't quite understand, if somebody's salary, and they get so much per year, would they get additional for taking vacation? That is.
That you could take a paid vacation, or you'd have like a week of sick time, or highway has 4 days or something for personal time, I think.
If your salary is based over the entire 52 weeks. So if you're missing a week because you're on vacation, that would be okay with me, but you would be paid what you normally would be paid.
Yeah, like Sue, like for instance, she just makes up her time. If she goes on vacation or whatever, her hours are her hours, so she doesn't technically get like the time off because she's like salary and an elected official. But what Eric was talking about is a little bit different. It'd be like me at work, I'm salary at work, and would I have like PTO? We have PTO, we don't differentiate whether it's vacation or sick or whatever. So could I take that time? Yes.
So if we had the assistant assessor was a full-time position in 5 years, let's say.
Yeah.
That time off will follow the collective bargaining agreement. Is that what we're saying?
Right.
Perfect. All right, thank you. Nice
If
to know if we had to
they're-
make
if they're
like our own
hourly.
policies.
If they're hourly.
If they're
Right.
hours,
Right.
but if they're not salaried, because we're not doing like a punch clock type system, I guess you could say it's like more of the honor system.
Right.
So to track it, it's hard, if someone's 35 hours and they're typically 7 hours, but they're gonna take off a Friday and they work 8 hours Monday through Thursday, or, there's no tracking of it, I guess. So that's why we said if you're salaried, then no vacation, no sick, no personal, because you're salary, so we're not tracking.
I got what you're saying now. Yeah, I just want to know whether we had to create more policy or not. It sounds like the answer is no, which is cool.
No, I think it's gonna simplify
That makes sense. I see what you're
tracking
saying.
pieces, if that makes sense.
Juneteenth is a federal holiday, so that will automatically be added in the 2025 bargaining agreement, and I don't know, the union might ask for it in 2024, maybe, I don't know.
Sounded like they're just gonna wait till the contract ran out and then talk about it. We worked it this year, so.
The only other thing I'd like to bring up, and I'll have Tiffany explain that part, is when her pay period ends and how it messes up when you have a Monday holiday.
So currently our work week is Monday to Sunday. Payday is Wednesday. So for the 2 days, so 2 days to happen from like close of the pay period until Wednesday to get, process and then direct deposit. If Monday's a holiday, we do okay because Checkwise is really good about processing it Tuesday morning and direct deposit. But if someone gets a paper check and it gets mailed, then there's potential it wouldn't be here on Wednesday.
It isn't anyway. we weren't the only ones. That anyone that has that company, the same thing happens. If you get a paycheck handed to you and there's a holiday and your payday's Wednesday, you don't get till Thursday.
That's why she would like to change
So-
the payday.
It's also, I mean, sometimes like I'll end up processing it on my end on a Monday if I know I'm not gonna be here Tuesday type of thing. But if someone's not gonna be here on a Monday, then it's just a tighter time crunch. So I don't know if you wanna push that payday, if you push payday to Thursday instead of Wednesday, that'll give you that extra day to,
Is that gonna mess with our agreement with the union?
I don't think it says a day in there, but they've been getting paid on Wednesdays for years now, so you're changing somebody's daily routine. I don't know if it would cause an issue.
I think if you do make that change, don't make it until sometime in the future and let's get this done.
Well, we could wait to make that change to the union contract.
but it's just something to think about with the tight turnout. Before we were processing checks in-house, so if someone got a paper check, most people are direct deposit. I think we need to make a bigger push for people to go direct deposit.
Honestly, if you're direct deposit, you're probably getting your check before Wednesday.
Yes.
Most of them we get it on
Typically.
Tuesday. Direct deposit.
So like those people are good, but I think we gotta kind of, also as a budget saving measure, if we push people to direct deposit, it's going to cut the processing. One, I can print pay stubs in house and so they don't have to mail anything. And two, it's just we have to pay a little bit more for cut checks versus direct deposit.
Well, on a personal note, I'm one of only 2 people in Sand Lake that has a paycheck handed to us, because I don't want my wife to have control of every dime in the house.
Why don't you create a new bank account that she doesn't know about?
No, she has bank accounts, I know, but she does everything. She's very good. She's gambling right now in New Jersey.
Good thing she doesn't have your check.
She might.
I mean, I can see Tiff's point because it is easier for us, like our pay period ends on Tuesday. So we have to have, Wednesday we call it in. The guys that have direct deposit gets theirs directly deposited on Thursday, and my live checks get Friday to the guys. But then if everybody's direct deposit, you don't have the delivery charge tacked onto there and everything.
Right.
So it is cost savings and it is a lot easier, but I have guys that don't have bank accounts for any number of reasons, so.
Thanks, wife.
Do you think the guys would care?
We were forced into direct deposit years ago, so it's not a
I
highway
was all
issue.
direct
We
deposit.
didn't have a choice.
Okay.
We were forced into direct deposit.
I would say most of our weekly and bi-weekly pay people are direct deposit. It's the monthly and the quarterly people that are not direct deposit.
Oh, right, you're giving $100 to the planning board, they don't really care to have it go right in the bank account.
Right.
Makes sense.
It also would clean up, like then you don't have checks outstanding, so like that would be a little bit cleaner.
That would be-
Is it possible to, like he said, highway got forced into it, is it possible to say that?
I'm not sure on that. My gut tells me no.
No.
We asked that same question.
Yeah. I mean, if you collectively bargained it,
Yeah,
you can agree to that. But requiring that as an employer or public employer,
Say no?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I was forced into direct deposit in like 2001. But it was a private company. You're saying it's a public company?
I think
Probably
that's
As a public
a
entity.
potential issue, yeah.
Who knows, someone might start requiring that we pay them in gold.
That's all I had. If you guys are okay with everything that we've discussed, then we can add that in there.
I'm fine with it. I think you did a good job. I appreciate all your hard work.
Looks simple now.
That means it was a job well done.
Yes.
Simple.
All I got then.
Thank you, June. Andy, do you have a quick update on the code revision?
Yes.
can you afford me a few minutes to step through things for
Yep.
you to think about?
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
This looks simple.
You take one and pass it down. Thank you. Sir, Tom is here. Mind providing one? Yep, go ahead, Tom.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe one for you guys, just. So, this, I believe, started with the April 6th memo from the planning board, okay? There's two concepts that are raised as I read it in the memo. One is the issue of multiple principal uses on a single parcel. The second concept is density, meaning the number of units you can have on a parcel or the number of lots that you can divide a parcel into. And if you just follow me, those are two separate zoning concepts. The first one is a concept of having multiple principal uses on a single lot. In general, zoning codes usually state there can only be one principal use on the lot. You can also have accessory uses as long as they're accessory to that single principal use on the lot. And you see that in many, and I would go as far as to say most zoning codes. Your land use regulations are different, okay? In your land use regulations, you do have a section, and we'll note it here, it's 150-9B. And what it says is, and this is, it's an odd term, but this is the heading of the section, construal, how you construe the provisions of your zoning law. That's 150-9. A subsection B says, no more than one principal building or use on any lot, other than as may be approved under the subdivision regulations or planned development district, shall be permitted. So when you start with that initial introduction, no more than one principal building or use on any lot shall be permitted. That sounds pretty consistent generally. But your code then goes on to say, unless minimum required area, lot width, and yard requirements are met for each. I'll tell you, in my experience, that's an unusual provision in the zoning law. So what it says is, you can have multiple, more than one, principal uses on a single lot. You can have a commercial use, and you can have a residential use, or an industrial use, or an open space use on a single lot, as long as each use meets the setbacks, the bulk requirements. That's unusual. Code allows that. So the first concept in this April 6th memo raised the issue of multiple principal uses. I will tell you right now, I've not dealt with that yet, okay? If the
I honestly
board,
don't have a problem with that.
and if the board does not want to change that, you can have more than one principal use on a single parcel or lot, as long as you're meeting the setbacks, the bulk, the area, the lot coverage. Your code allows that. And if the board is comfortable with that, at some point, this board, a predecessor board, was comfortable with that because it's in your code now. If you want to keep it that way, that's within your discretion to do so. And if you want to make a change and say, we've reconsidered that and we only want one principal use on a lot, you can make that change too. What I'm going to go through with you, I have drafted a proposed local law. It does not address the issue of multiple uses, multiple principal uses on a single lot. Because that's in your code, that's been allowed. It doesn't deal with the density. Those are two separate concepts. Density is how many units can I get on a single lot? Or how many lots, if I subdivide it, am I entitled to get from this property? That's a different zoning concept than I can do multiple uses on one single lot, okay? I'm not sure what
Can I ask you something?
you can.
You're saying multiple uses, but if an area is zoned residential, you can't do commercial use no matter what.
But it would,
Is that correct?
You have to look at your area, or strike that, your use table. And if you go into a particular zoning district, okay, as is any use table, you have your districts, and then you have your uses, okay? If you then go through, there can be multiple different principal permitted uses that are allowable in that zoning district. It's not as simple
It's a
as,
store across the street, it's a store downstairs and apartments upstairs.
those are two
Right.
separate uses
That's
on
the
a single
hamlet
parcel.
specifically, right?
And that may be allowable because in the hamlet, you can have an apartment or an accessory apartment, and you can have a commercial use, or you can have a mixed-use building. But just be aware your code, and it would depend on the lot. Let's say a lot's in a residential zone, fine. I go to the column in your use table and go down through everything that's allowed, all these different uses. I can have more than one on a single lot, as long as I'm meeting the setbacks, the lot coverage, the area, and the bulk issues. I can do more than one use on a single lot. And that's perfectly legal right now in the town. And if you want to continue that, then there's no change to that. I'm going to go over with you in a minute the other issue. That's the one we initially talked about, which is density, which I think the board had an issue with on how you compute how many units you can get on a single parcel. Let's talk about kind of one in particular. Let's say you had an 8-acre parcel, and you look at the zoning district and it had said, well, I can have one dwelling unit per acre. Well, I've got 8 acres, I can get 8 dwelling units. And that's the way it worked. Yeah, but what happens if 4 out of those 8 acres could never be buildable? They're wetlands. Well, right now your code doesn't account for that, and it says you can still get 8 units. Then you end up putting 8 units pretty close together on the remaining 4 acres, because you still had 8 units that you could do on this parcel.
But isn't there minimum lot size in certain districts?
There may be, but in
So is
terms
that
of
2 acres
density,
in certain areas and?
when you look at your area and bulk table, that's the next thing, okay? There is a section that deals with minimum residential density, and that's what we're really talking about, right? And the only thing you've got here is, for most districts, it's 1 dwelling unit per acre. In one district, the hamlet, it's 1 dwelling unit per half acre, okay? But then you've got other area and bulk issues that you usually have. Lot width, maximum building coverage, open space percentage, your setbacks for front, side, and rear. And that's all you have. And you do have minimum lot area, 1 acre, 2 acre. That just means the smallest lot you could build on is 1 or 2 acres. You got 8 acres, that's irrelevant. And if I'm allowed 1 dwelling unit per acre, irrespective of whether it's buildable or not, I get 8 units. Okay, I might have had to crunch them in on 2 acres, but I met the minimum acreage limit. I'm more than 1 acre, I'm more than 2 acres. The density is based on 1 dwelling unit per acre, regardless of buildability or not. I get 8 units. If I meet the setbacks per building, I'm good to go. And that's the way your code is set up now. And if you're comfortable with that as a town board, you make no changes. But if you want to consider density in terms of not counting the areas on which you can't build toward the maximum number of units that you could put on a piece of property, then you're going to have to make a legislative decision to change your land use law. So that's the issue as I understood it, that came up from the planning board. Did I interpret that correctly?
Thank you, sir.
Is the answer yes? I
Yes, sir.
interpreted that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next thing then I want you to look at is I put together, and this is a draft, It is an initial draft, it's a first draft, it's meant to be reviewed and marked up. This should be looked at by a number of eyes. I've generally discussed this with Tracy. He knows the concept, he should review this. Clearly, your planning board should review this. But this is a concept of taking into account what I've called in here. And no pride in authorship, this is very similar to what Brunswick has adopted. I use that as the template. We worked with LaBerge on the revision to the Brunswick code. So if they do move forward and work on your code, this will not be foreign to them. But this doesn't take into account constrained lands in determining how many units should be allowed on a particular property or how many lots you could get if you sought to subdivide it. The concept is you do not take into account or utilize what would be otherwise unbuildable land. You shouldn't get the benefit of number of units or lots for land that you could never build on to begin with. That's the concept. So I'll very briefly step through this. And again, it's draft, it's the first draft, it's meant to be reviewed, marked up. There's a little bit more to get through before it's ever in a form for you to adopt, okay?
If you clarified the 1 acre or 2 acre sizes so that you could say there has to be 2 acres for each house, wouldn't that?
It's a different way of doing it. And if you want to go in that direction, then that's an approach.
That's how I thought the law read.
No, when I read.
Well, that was my misunderstanding.
Yeah, when I read in your code, again, the minimum lot area, it's not the minimum per unit, it's the minimum lot that you need in order to build on. That's how I interpret it. It's a minimum lot area of at least 1 or 2 acres, depending on what zone you're in, okay? But a different approach is, and usually it's like with subdivisions, you've got to have a minimum 1 acre lot. That's one way to do it with subdivisions. The challenge you face with doing it that way, and I know you have a cluster provision in your code, is many times the large lot subdivisions ended up in sprawl. That's what people were finding out. Well, I need a minimum 1 acre lot. I need a minimum 2 acre lot. The concept was, well, then there'd be a lot of open space, right? Minimum 1 or 2 acre, just building a house. Well, what you end up doing is putting houses over entire tracts, let's say 100 acres, and you need a minimum 2 acre lot. Well, okay, you eliminate the roads and things like that. Maybe I end up with 40 lots. Instead of having a lot of open space, you've got 40 houses spread out over like 80, 90 acres. But that's a requirement when you have a minimum 1 or 2 acre lot. The other approach is to say, fine, you've got 100 acres, but you might have 20 acres of wetlands. It might be in the floodplain. There might be a 20% slope over here. Let's take a look at the property and say, what's the appropriate build-out for this property? We'll take into account the slopes, the wetlands, the regulated areas. Those come out. What are you left with? Then we do the 1 or 2 acre minimum, and then we figure it out. That's how the approach is done here. It's a different one. I want you to think about it. I'll step through it kind of quickly, okay? And then give it some thoughts. So I won't say you can disregard, but sections 1 and 2, the purpose of legislative findings is really lawyer stuff. Okay, that's just in there about identifying the issue of density, you're taking a look at it, it's appropriate to revisit your zoning, it's to update this periodically. So that's in 1 and 2. The guts of this is in section 3 enactments. What the approach that Brunswick did, and a concept for you to think about, is add a couple of definitions to your definitions section. This is now on page 3. The 2 concepts, and this is a little simpler than Brunswick did, I kind of pared it down a little bit, is base density and constrained land. Start with constrained land. It's a parcel's acreage that includes existing buildings. Obviously, you shouldn't be able to take into account areas that already have existing buildings in your unit count, unless you plan on demolishing, and it becomes open space. Surface water bodies, DEC wetlands, federal wetlands, these concepts of floodplains and floodways and steep slopes. All of these numbers in terms of percentages, that's up to you. However, you as a town board wants to look at that with input from others. These would be the types of things that would be considered constrained land. If you couldn't build on that to begin with, you shouldn't be allowed to take that into account in terms of your unit count. The base density definition then is the maximum allowable number of residential units that might be permitted on one lot, or the maximum allowable number of lots that may be created through subdivision in accordance with what would be a new section added to your code, 150-11. That's the next thing here. 150-11 is amended. This is generally your area and bulk schedule. Right now, your code just has the language that's down in letter A. The general area and bulk requirements in each land use district are set forth in the attached district schedule. That's fine. What would be added is sub B, and that's a density calculation. In general, I've already kind of gone through how it would work. You start with, and get down to number 2, step 1. You look at the total acreage of the property, and then, and this would be on the property owner and his or her consultant to calculate. You go through and determine the acreage of the constrained land, taking into account all of these issues. So as an example, a 100-acre piece of property with 30 or 40 acres meet the definition of constrained lands. What do you do with that? Then you calculate the gross resulting buildable acreage by subtracting the constrained land from the total lot size. So I start with 100 acres, I got 40 acres of constrained land, I'm left with 60 acres of buildable. Then you take those 60 acres and you apply that density factor, one dwelling unit or one lot per acre. So I get 60. If it's a half an acre, I get 120, things like that.
But you can't bunch them all onto a small piece and leave the rest vacant. Correct.
Cluster though.
You
Can if
can,
it's usable land.
if
can
it's
if it's
usable
swamp.
land and they come in with a proposal to cluster, you have a cluster provision in your land use regs. That's within the discretion of the planning board to look at the plan to determine whether that kind of density, it's got to meet the setbacks, meet the lot coverage, does that work as a cluster proposal? If not, then they're spread out, okay?
See, I don't have a problem with clustering, it's gonna leave open space. My
Right.
problem is if the open space is swamp, it should be counted as open space.
In those non-buildable areas, the constrained land, they're gonna be open space anyway. Because you can't build on them, nor you should be allowed to.
You know, that
use
whole section of
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. But again, this is just one approach, and it's raising the issue for you to think about. There could be other ways to do it. And again, this is one that I kind of borrowed. If in fact you do retain LaBerge to help with your code, and whether it's Ben, whether it's Nicole, whether it's someone else over there, these are things of different approaches to this concept that they can help you with. This is just the first effort. I kind of drafted this as the first step for you to get you going. Thank you. So, as I said at 1.2, there are other sections of your code. This is not as easy as, well, this is what we want to do. You got to go through the code, which is what we did, and it took some time, I'll tell you, to figure out, well, what other sections would need to be amended to make this consistent. I hope we've hit everything, but again, this is a first draft, subject to review. Tracy should look at it, the planning board should look at it. So there's these other sections, 150-30A. It had other ways to calculate density, quite frankly. It took into account some of these issues. I don't know why this was a standalone provision in the code, but it was never repeated anywhere else. Those should come out, and that base density is calculated in accordance with section 150-11. is these other sections about a site plan, a sketch plan. This is where someone comes into your board with a sketch plan, you take an initial look at it, right? This would require the sketch plan to include not just the existing zoning and special districts, which are currently required, but calculation of the constrained lands and the base density. That should be shown on the sketch plan, so you know right at the beginning, you get a chance to look at it in a concept, and you say yay or nay, or you get some input. Before all the money's spent on the bells and whistles of a detailed site plan or subdivision plat, you deal with these issues, right, at the sketch plan. And then I've added something, June, on the PDDs, because this is, I borrowed liberally from Brunswick, this is how they did it. And it was, base density should be calculated even for a PDD based on the property, okay?
Yeah.
And then if the base density, if the site had, and I know you may not have public sewer in town, they do in parts of Brunswick, but not all. But there could be that in the future, there could be a different community sewerage proposal, okay? But these are things that, if you have public water and public sewer, then you can get more density because you don't need the separations per septic or well, okay? But if you don't have public water and sewer, then you should be limited to the base density still. You can put them wherever you want to, or if you want to, you can say, if there's no public water or public sewer, we'll give you a bump, maybe of 50%. If you have public water and sewer, we'll give you a bump of 100%. Those percentages, those things, that's for you. That's for you to think about. But this would be in the PDD section that says, it's not no holds barred, even with PDDs. We'll put some limit on the number of allowable units or lots you could even do through a PDD. Okay. Well, that's the proposal.
If we're gonna do it.
It gives more flexibility through the PDD process, and maybe you want to give someone a little bump to get a little extra units, some more flexibility, but not unlimited. This would put some limits on it, so take a look at that section. All right, this would provide, we did the best we could with the damn column, not good on these things, but this would revise one column then in your area and bulk table. So we would now add the column for the density factor, okay? And that's, and I've just kept the same for each zoning district. One's dwelling unit per lot per acre, okay? It adds a note indicating that factors to be used in calculating base density. This is just one approach. It was the concept of, as I understood it, from that planning board April memo and our discussion is, we want to make sure that we have something in place to deal with the density issue, the number of units per lot, or the number of lots you can get through subdivision, by not having property owners take advantage in that calculation of areas that they can never build on anyway. This is one approach to it. As I said, there could be others. It at least gets you thinking about this and starts the process. It's likely this will go through several revisions before it's ever in a shape where you can even propose it as a local law and have a public hearing on it. That's why it's draft. It should be considered draft. We discussed it at a public meeting. People can look at it, okay? But that's for you. At this point, I'll give that to you to review it, comment on it, and move forward and work on it.
When we do move forward, we're gonna need a public hearing anyway, right?
Correct.
So there's it's a little bit of a process anyway.
Yeah. But we get it, we started now, right?
Well, I appreciate it because I think you did a lot of work in just trying to decipher what was being asked of you. So.
It was a little extra work.
I want to go ahead.
Watch what went on with, excuse me, last one. 2. I would like to see this go through as quickly as possible, so somebody doesn't invest money trying to use our current code to divert this. I'm really glad to see this.
Well, I'm glad to work on it and continue to work on it, but the process is gonna take the time it has to take because you can't change the deadlines for public hearings and public comment. And the planning board really is gonna have to sit down with this and probably have a special meeting or two and really look at this and then come back with recommendations to us.
Right, but at least the process has begun.
That's all I'm hoping for, because it's gonna take time, I know it's gonna take time, but if we don't start something, situations like what happened down below with one,
Well,
they come back again.
As fast as you want it to move forward, it's gonna depend on how fast you guys get on.
Pete, what I'm saying is the process has begun, that's the big key, that was the big key, Andy, thank you very, very much. Okay, that's what we're asking, at least it started, now we have something to go back and forth with, and bring back in a more formal sense. We put out a general idea of what we're looking for, and then he was gracious enough, and June was gracious enough to work on that. But that's what we just started the ball rolling, that's all we're asking for. Because if the ball doesn't roll, it's just gonna take longer and longer, and situations will arise again, similar to what Mr. Bolan told. Because they took the time and they studied what we have on regulations and guides, and they were able to push that through. And a large percentage of that property is unbuildable.
Okay, so I'm all good with this. I understand like the density and like how all that issue came about and everything and how the wetland should be out. But what I'm not clear on is the other question that came about was, okay, we have the 8-acre parcel, we have the 4 units, but it wasn't like a house, it was townhouses that were divided into 2.
Yes.
So that I'm still not clear on, because that became an issue for the planning board that people spoke up about, because if you have like a whole section of farmland, then what happens, how many of those units could really go up on the 1 acre, let's say?
So here's, it's the mixture of a few zoning concepts, okay? When you raise that, I go to the district of use table, and then you go to duplex as an allowable use, as an allowable residential use in the town. And then you go across and see what zoning districts they're in. They're allowed in every zoning district except CLI.
Commercial
I'm not sure what that
residential.
is.
Commercial light.
Or natural products, which is up to this board to begin with. But they're allowed in every zoning district. And there is no limit on how many you can put right now on one area, because there's nothing to deal with density. So they were able to get 8. And again, this is not particular to one unit. That project, when constructed, may be an asset for the town, right? But as an example, it ended up being, as I understand it, a unit count of 8, because it was 8 acres and 1 unit per acre, but only a limited area was actually buildable, because they needed to stay outside the regulated wetlands, they needed to stay away from lot lines, and that added the density in a very small area, correct?
Correct, but there was also pushback because of that you could have like that duplex or whatever on the 1 acre. And I thought that was coming into play too with what they were asking.
Well, that comes into the first concept, which is, can you have more than one principal use on a lot? And the answer is right now, yes.
But if we wanted to change that part, we just kind of left that alone.
And that's not in here.
Right.
That'd be,
So that's a whole.
that's a whole separate, it could be woven into this local law to deal with both. It could be treated separately. It could be something different like Dave raised, which is you can only have 1 unit per acre, not in terms of calculating total lot count or unit count, but literally limiting, we're only going to allow 1 principal structure per acre, per half acre. That's a different concept too. Okay? When you have those things, like limiting it to 1 structure, 1 principal structure per acre, it does tend to spread things out over a large area to try to get the unit per lot count to make a project economically viable. And many times, the current trend in zoning, as I see it, is trying to get units clustered, and you do have a cluster provision. 2 reasons at a minimum. 1, it keeps more open space actually open. And 2, as a developer, you have less infrastructure to build. It makes the project economically viable. If you're spreading out a project over a large area and you need to get infrastructure to them, the infrastructure costs go up. In order for the project to work, that means my unit count has to be as high as I can get it. If you require less infrastructure cost, you make the project economically viable with less units. Developers always want more units, but just economically, a project still remains viable with less units and less area. That's the benefit of the cluster. So
Yep.
just some things to think about.
I understand that, but I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a couple people on the planning board that had the issue with not being like a house per acre, that they were really dividing that to get like the units.
We get taken advantage of.
Yeah, I read that to say it's not limiting to one principal structure per acre, but it's used to calculate the total number of units you can get on a
Right.
parcel.
Right.
And so,
I don't understand, we're not allowed to have a duplex on 1 acre, are we? A 2-family on 1 acre?
Yeah.
I thought it was, you would need 2 acres for a 2-family.
no, so not the way I read it. So you need to have a minimum lot. Okay, you need to have a minimum lot. This doesn't say per unit, it just says the minimum lot area. Okay, you gotta have at least an acre. Okay. The next column is maximum residential density. It's a separate concept. Now you're dealing with density as it's currently addressed in your code. 1 dwelling unit per acre. That's used to calculate the total number of units you can get on this particular parcel. If it's a 1 acre parcel, you get 1. If it's an 8 acre parcel, you get 8 units.
But if you're gonna double them up, you get 16. I mean, if you're saying that you can allow a duplex on 1 acre,
No, you get 8 total dwelling units. A duplex is 2 dwelling units.
but yeah,
Four buildings.
under our current code, you can have a duplex on 1 acre.
Not the way I read it.
Oh, all right, okay, then, anyway, so if you need 2 acres to put a 2-family house on,
That, again, that's the concept of, we're only going to allow 1 principal structure per acre, per 2 acres. per
see, I don't have a
whatever.
problem with a 2-family on 2 acres.
Yeah, but let's see,
They did it on School Street though, wasn't it? Those 1 acre lots?
That was considered part of the hamlet too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, in the hamlet, you only need a 1/2 acre,
Right.
so you can do
They
that.
got 2
1
hamlets.
acre will give you two,
Oh.
but if you
I would
went into
say-
the residential zone, you'd need 2 acres.
On subdivisions, when it says the minimum lot area, if it's 1 acre, you do need to have a 1 acre lot. And if you create a 1 acre lot through subdivision, you're generally getting 1 house on the lot, okay? Unless it's a cluster. But for a site plan, that really doesn't fit because you're not dividing the lot. You've got your lot. Then the only issue is, well, am I allowed residential units on that lot? Yes, I am. Well, how many units can I get? I go to the next column in the table, maximum residential density, and if I'm in the residential zoning district, I get 1 dwelling unit per acre. I get 8 acres, I get 8 dwelling units. Okay, I get up to 8 units. It also allows me to do a duplex in this zoning district. I can have 4 duplex buildings. That's my 8 dwelling units. And I'm not constrained on, it's gotta be per acre or whatever. That's the way I've read the code. I think that's how your code was interpreted to allow that particular project to move forward. That's why that project, I think that's a reasonable interpretation of your current code. And so, yeah, one issue is density. How many units can you get on this? And the other concept is, do we want to have, as a town, a minimum lot size per principal structure? And that's something for you to think about.
I think that's something like that we should think about, because that's what happened at Mockview, that people were concerned about. So not only did they get away with the wetlands, they also got away with the number of units that they put there.
But they only got away with the units because they had the acreage, the total acreage.
Right.
See, I think the Blackview issue would be entirely different if you took away the unusable land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really all you have to do. Honestly, don't have a problem with somebody having a 2-acre lot and putting a 2-family house there, as long as you got 2 acres. That's reasonable to me.
That would be up on the mountain, right? That's
Well, on the
issue.
mountain, the density is even higher.
But there's
You need-
where's there 2 acres down here? Is it all 1 acre down here?
1 acre in the residential, that's
Up there. yeah.
upstairs too. So in order to put a duplex up, or a duplex up there, you need 4 acres.
But the way I understand it, is that you could do a duplex on a 1 acre, as it's currently right now, right?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I didn't.
Only in
Well,
Hamlet.
It's right, it's tough because, for the most part, to get the allowable number of dwelling units, it is based on 1 dwelling unit per acre.
Okay, that's fine.
So if you have a duplex, you wouldn't need 2 acres because you have 2 units.
The only reason they get away with it by the school is because that's the Hamlet.
Yeah, your
And even there, it probably
Hamlet
shouldn't have been allowed, but
is one
it is.
dwelling unit per half acre. So you
And they're
could get a
crammed in
duplex
together.
on a 1 acre lot in Hamlet, so.
And they're crammed in on swamp.
Yeah.
I mean, if you had the usable land, those would have been able to be built, because behind that one that Mohammed built is all wetlands.
Yeah. Very well.
So I think that's the key, usable land.
Question, immediately have that definition has to be explained very thoroughly.
The question I had is that what June was talking about, the multiple uses, I never even heard of that until, that's fairly rare? The multiple
That's-
use, primary use.
So clearly in the Hamlet, it's not.
That is,
But is,
it's not common
Right.
throughout the state.
Right.
Usually your most zoning codes will say you get 1 principal use per lot.
but it's not different in the Hamlet because we don't have it written in that the Hamlet can have more than 1, right?
Actually, it's written in any zoning district. You can have multiple.
Do you think the
uses.
original purpose may have been because in the Hamlet you have business on the first floor and apartments on the second?
And that's the history of the Hamlet.
Right.
But you also have farmers that have farm stands and, they're in the front of their house.
Right.
There's a number of things to consider what constitutes multiple uses. Some guy works on cars in his garage next to his house, and years past, it's been allowed in Postville. It's just, it was never an issue until the density of Postville's, 30 years ago, nobody even thought about this kind of stuff.
Right, and the concept is you can't just do anything. Each of those principal uses still has to be allowable in that particular zoning district. So it's a concept of, we think that use is okay in that part of town. You just allow multiple to be on 1 lot.
I think we should get rid of that throughout the town. That's a bad idea, personally.
Disagree.
But again, that's
I think it's probably a bad idea.
subject to
Put
discussion,
Postville
that's
down.
within
I don't
your
know that
decision.
road needs Postville.
I think you should leave it.
Maybe the Hamlet can keep it, that's about it.
Well, I mean, Keith's example of farmer and farm stand, I mean, why should we tell them they can't do that?
I don't know if that's a
That
good
could be
example.
covered under ag law too.
Could be.
His concept of someone's living in the house, there's a detached garage, and they're operating a lawnmower repair business.
Nothing
Well,
wrong.
that's a residential and a commercial use on the same lot.
Right.
You could do it in Poskett. You can't do that in other towns.
Another town, would you have to get a variance?
A variance.
Right, you have to go, right, and we
Yeah.
have that same problem in Brunswick once. Right.
That's exactly right. We can't, that often comes
You can
up.
still do it, you just have to go.
People in a neighborhood come home with their big, with all due respect, commercial trucks or their commercial equipment and park the backhoe in the yard, and the neighbors go nuts and say, well, it's a fine line between, is that a residential use or are you now using it partly for commercial? And you can't do that in most towns. You could here.
I like it.
It did, snap on.
Sure.
Yeah, we got a Snap-on dealer in Weatherwax.
Or a lawn, or as
Doesn't
you
bother
said,
anybody.
lawnmower wax.
Snake Hill, more than one.
I'm
That was all right.
inclined.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for your hard work. That brings us in, Carl, you wanted to talk about the door?
Oh, excuse me. Speaking here. Yes, PK can tell you, we have not found anybody else really interested in doing this. This is it.
Did you talk to the company in Saratoga?
And Tracy did, I did, and
Yeah,
DJ.
I had two people come and measure it, the same two that came and quoted us up to the highway garage. After like 3 weeks, I reached out to him again. One said he needed more time because it was a big project for him. That was Abley Glass, who does all of Dunkin's doors and windows at all their storefronts. And then I haven't heard from him, haven't even got a phone call back. The second one was Roche Brothers, I think they were in Saratoga or Clifton Park. And the last I heard from them was before 4th of July, that he needed more time to research because they couldn't find that door that we wanted.
I hired them to do a project in Sand Lake
Yeah.
and we ended up never paying them. They were supposed to put in a receiving window in the court clerks that had a drawer, so there was no direct contact. They came in and installed the metal things, and then they brought a window with an opening in it. And that's not what we contracted with. They were horrible. And to this day, they keep sending us letters, they want to be paid, and we won't pay them.
Well, it seemed like both of those weren't too interested if they couldn't be bothered to follow back with an actual quote on what it would cost. They didn't
They didn't want the
They
job.
didn't want the job. So the only one that we actually had was from Maine Gion, was the only actual.
Well, I can tell you, it was a very good company. I deal with them a lot. They've been very good.
Is that pricing fair?
And I called this.
Seems high, but everything seems high. I mean, they also quoted us, Maine Gion, for 2 steel doors at Highway, and it was almost 13,000. And they're simpler doors, but they're fire doors, and they're cemented into the bricks, so it was a little bit more intricate, but. I mean, yeah, 12,000 seems high, but that's also a lot of work and custom work they're gonna be doing, probably not too unrealistic.
And also electronic work.
Yeah.
Yes. They will do all the electronics except run the wire. Tracy and I can run the wire. It'll be hooked up so that when the suit turns the key on and off, this will go on and off.
Yeah, we threw a security system.
So
So
all
we
we
alarm the system.
They
and
did call
handicap
today,
turns off.
and this price stands.
Well, I'd like to, I don't think we can do it at the workshop here, but I'd like to put it on the agenda for the town board.
Yeah.
It gives people a few weeks to think about it, but winter is coming.
Yeah, I think they said it was what, 4 to 6 week lead time to get the materials, so you're
8 to 10.
8 to 10, so.
I'll put it on the agenda for our regular meeting, and then we can act on it then.
Should we have a straw vote on that? Is there any dissenting?
I'm not a big, I don't know that it's super necessary personally, but that's just one person's opinion.
Well, I found, my opinion was when a really cold day comes, you probably lose 50% of the heat because of an opening down there. And I'll go out with you after the meeting and show you that it's like a board this thick that holds the difference between inside and outside. I mean, if we do nothing like this, we gotta do something to insulate that area. And there's 3 heaters in that hall, 3. That's probably enough to heat your house. And it's cold in the winter.
That is also the part of the town hall that a lot of people see. They look at the
Yes.
building, and
And
having it look kind of semi-rotten is not a good idea either.
The only
Yeah,
other thing I
the
would
thing
say too, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The only other thing I would say is when the one Abley was there looking at the door, I was here with him and so was Tracy. That floor in the first, coming in the first door, that floor is very soft and funky, as if water's getting in there. So if you're gonna invest all that money into fixing that, I don't know if because that's so rotted that's why water's coming in, but it seems like something should be done with that floor too.
I think
It
we're
felt
doing more
soft.
out there because those
Just standing
columns.
on it, and you're putting people with
When you're
wheelchairs.
Saturday when you're there, look up at that column, it's got a hole in it like this.
Yeah, it would be.
Woodpecker.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so I don't know what to do about those columns, that's not included in this.
Well, sometimes there's people who can fix those.
We can get those fixed.
Yeah.
We just have to find the right carpenter to
Just so
come
you
in.
know, that's not included in
The
this
columns are not,
necessity.
they're not necessarily load bearing either, they're more decorative.
I'd be inclined to approve this.
I think it's a better idea than your other idea for closing off at the
Yeah.
top of the stairwell.
Just- Sometimes you gotta,
All right, do we need an executive session?
we have to pay bills, right?
Yep.
And then, I move that we pay the town and highway bills of $11,896.38.
I'll second.
All in favor?
I
All opposed?
move that we pay the water bills of $519.78.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn unless there's a need for executive session. We haven't heard anything about the Bosworth. I haven't heard anything, you?
I haven't heard anything.
I know the school I asked for a copy of what we did at our last town board meeting, our resolution. For potential litigation against the school. They wanted a copy of everything. That's just common, so.
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and effort.
Sir?
Very good.
You bet. We'll see you Tuesday night, right?
We appreciate that very much also. Thank you. June